This is a usability test report for the bee catching game prototype. This test looked at the first prototype of the bee catching game developed by Jonas Kopf to see if players could complete the goal of the game within the time limits. While most players were able to understand the basic controls and goals of the game, there were a few issues with the game mechanics and visuals that made it difficult for them to do this. Some players were unable to figure out the mechanics of the moving platforms and functions of other objects in the game. In particular, the dice block on the platform and the two blocks at the beginning of the game when you spawn in were confusing. Other issues we identified were that the camera positioning was awkward for many, and it made it difficult to pinpoint the locations of the bees in the 3D space. There were also issues arising due to the loud buzzing of the bees and the lack of a volume option in the options menu. Moving on to objectives and methods. First, to give context, this is the first round of research looking at the prototype for the Catching Bees game. The goal of this game is to catch all the bees within the game's borders within the 3-minute time limits. And the goal of this research is to see if players can successfully catch all the bees and understand what hurdles in the game make it frustrating for players to complete these goals. Using this information, we can determine what can be implemented in order to make the gameplay experience better for the players. The research objectives are if the presentation of the game functions in the game is adequate for the player to begin playing immediately. We want to know if a tutorial upon opening the game would be helpful for the player experience. We're also looking at whether the player can figure out the mechanics of the moving platforms, whether they use the options menu to learn the mechanics of the game and if this menu is satisfactory for their needs, and if players understand the basic controls of the games. In terms of method, we use a direct observation method and an interview immediately after. There were 8 participants, and they were screened by demographic and their experience on video games. Both quantitative and qualitative information was recorded. In terms of prioritization of the usability issues that we identified, positive issues indicated good practice, where the features worked as intended. Critical issues are those that, if they were not fixed, users wouldn't be able to complete the goal of the game. Serious issues are issues that frustrate players and can cause them to give up. Minor issues were just annoying issues, but they didn't prevent players from completing the game. These are issues that should be revisited at a later time. So, the direct observation study is designed to observe how players go about completing the goals of the game and their behavior while doing so. This helps determine what parts of the game are hindering them from completing the game and the sort of things that they find difficult to do within the game. The hope is that by fixing these issues, the game can be better designed in the future and provide a better play experience for players. Unfortunately, this type of study does not provide accurate qualitative data on whether the participants enjoy the game or if they would choose to play it in their own spare time. To supplement this, we chose to implement a short interview after playtesting. The goal of the interview is to supplement and provide qualitative data missing from the direct observation test. We asked a series of questions regarding the participants' opinions on the game and the game mechanics in particular. However, this information is self-reported data, and there is always a possibility that the participant is biased or not telling the truth.
Based on these research objectives, methods, and interview results from our participants, here are some of the important usability findings that we've concluded in our research report. These findings are ranked in terms of their severity and prioritization according to the previous slides. Here are some of the usability positives we found. The controls are simple and easy to learn. Using WASD for movement is pretty standard for a lot of video games, so most of our players reported no difficulties using them. Some players didn't even open up the control menu and just started playing right away. The double jumping function was very helpful, and some players were able to mask it and use it to their advantage. However, this function is not listed in the control menu, and some players didn't even realize until much later, or even at all. All of our participants was able to complete the game within the 10-minute limit. Although not all the game mechanics were fully understood, most players took a few tries to complete the game. The interface was clean, and players were able to identify their goals very quickly. Many players spend a lot of time trying to fully understand some of the mechanics, but they were able to win regardless, making them less frustrating. And here are some of the negatives we found. The first issue was the unclear platform mechanics. Like this example picture here, players were often confused about the mechanics of the moving platform. They're not sure how to make it move and what triggers it to stop. The confusion resulted in player timing out and unable to finish the game. And some players finish the game but still don't understand the mechanics. So a possible solution would be to include a short tutorial on how to use these platforms. And the second issue was the confusing blocks. These blocks look unique and felt as though they have a function, but players couldn't figure them out as there's no instructions about their functions. Most players noticed the dice block on the vertical platform and the two more near the spawn point, but they don't know what they mean. The dice block in particular would light up randomly, and players would spend a lot of time trying to understand it, despite it having no effect on the gameplay. Similarly, our recommendation was to include like a pop-up menu explaining these items. This could help the players to differentiate which objects require attention and which ones don't.
The third issue we have here is the camera position. It's very confusing. The camera position made it difficult to pinpoint the location of the bees. This was especially noticeable for the bees in the air on top of the platform when the character needs to jump in order to catch. This is because the camera is not locked into the direction faced by the player character. The camera also appeared difficult to use due to the low frame rate experienced by some players. Not many players tried to change the look sensitive in the options menu as they were confused about the word look. One way to make it less confusing is to rename look sensitivity into something like camera sensitivity. Here we have a feedback from the player when they do their testing. The player found it's difficult to move the camera around as it is not locked in the direction faced by in the game avatar. This means that the character could walk backwards while the camera faced forwards, make the movement feel disoriented. The unlocked camera also resulted in player losing their orientation after spinning around and jumping in order to catch a bee. A lock function on the camera so that it faced the direction of the player characters at all times could fix this issue. Another way to solve this issue as well as other issues surrounding controls for the controls menu to appear as an overlay over the game when the player press start so they are told that this option is available. The fourth issue we have is the misleading catched method. Despite being referred as bee catching game and the character carrying a net, there is no catching mechanics rather than the player must run into the bees to catch them. The net is a prominent piece of the character, which can mislead players. As the feedback displayed here, many players found themselves trying to make use of the net despite it has no functionality. Since the name of the game was bee catching, they believed that they need to use the net to catch the bees and were surprised when they caught it just by walking into them. Similar to the dice block and the block that's at the spawn point, the net appeared to be significant to the game and misleads players into trying to use it. A common mistake many players made at the beginning of the game was trying to use the left mouse button to use the net. One recommendation is to incorporate net functionality into the game or remove it, as to not mislead players. Another way to solve this issue could be to outline in the control that the method of catching bees is to walk into them. The last but not least issues we found is the poor visual and sound design of the bees. The bees are very large and do not appear to look like bees. This can be confusing for some players when the game tells them to catch the bees. The bees are also very loud and the buzzing can become annoying. There is no option to reduce the volume or mute it. Players noticed that bees do not appear to like actual bees, and it was somewhat confusing and jarring. Another issue brought up by the player was that the bees were too loud and there is no option to turn down the volume, make it difficult to listen to play the game. As we mentioned in the previous slide, there is no way to turn the volume down or just simply mute the bee sound. So here is some of the players complain about the bee is too loud. Also, we are not able to hear them correctly. The buzzing could become annoying after a while, and it could make it difficult to concentrate on the game. One way to solve this issue is to introduce an option to turn down the certain sounds in the game or mute them. Our recommendation to this game is more tutorial options should be available, as explaining the controls in greater depth, in particular the double jumping and the platform mechanics. Pop-up tutorial box can appear as the player character approach the platform or other significant objects. These can display hints or guides on how to use the object. This will also help players to determine which object require their attention and time and which one do not. Also, more camera options should be available for players in order to fix the issue of the confusing camera. Some participants noted that it was strange that the camera is not facing the same direction as the character, and this caused them to feel disoriented. Participants who opened the control menu found themselves confused at the look-sensitive option. This wording was confusing, and changing it to something more familiar, such as camera sensitivity, may encourage players to use the option as a way to fix the camera positioning. That concludes our final project report. This presentation is based on the final report from Group 4 of the DEC 305 courses at the University of Waterloo in for 2020 term. This report is written by Christopher He, Stephanie Liang, and Vichou Zhang. Thanks again for the support from the professor. This report is based on the feedback from the participants when we first time played the game. All the participants participated in this study as out of the university community or not enrolled at the university. The processed raw data is available upon request. Thank you for watching.